In examining the character of Jerry Lewis, one might first see a joyous figure bringing laughter to audiences everywhere. Yet, lurking beneath his vibrant persona was a complexity defined by intense rivalries and multifaceted artistry. His childhood experiences shaped a sense of insecurity, which manifested in his comedic style. This vulnerability connected with fans but also set him up for conflict with peers. The relationships he cultivated, such as the famed partnership with Dean Martin, fell victim to both blazing success and simmering tension. Though adored for his ability to entertain, he often faced backlash for his approaches to humor and film projects. These clashes left a trail of equally ardent praise and harsh criticisms, fueling a narrative that persisted throughout his life. His philanthropic efforts, particularly for muscular dystrophy, further complicated the image, making it hard to categorize him simply as a comic genius or a controversial figure. With each revelation, the audience is invited to reconsider their perceptions of this iconic and polarizing entertainer. Jerry Lewis is often seen as a pioneering force in comedy who reshaped the landscape of entertainment. Beginning in the 1940s, he captivated audiences with a unique style that combined physical humor and comedic genius. His influential work spanned television, film, and live performances, making him a household name. Lewis was not just an actor, he was a director and a fundraiser who brought significant attention to important causes. His innovative approach in films like The Nutty Professor turned slapstick into something more meaningful, allowing viewers to connect with the characters on a deeper level. However, behind this celebrated career lies a contrasting personal story. Close friends and family described him as controlling and emotionally removed, illustrating a different side to his larger-than-life persona. His relationships with his children, particularly his sons, were marked by tension and dissatisfaction, often exacerbated by his strict discipline and lack of affection. Reports of mistreatment of co-stars and allegations of infidelity painted a troubling picture of his interactions with women in the industry. Despite these serious personal challenges, Lewis fostered a devoted following and was admired for his philanthropic work, especially his long-standing involvement with the Muscular Dystrophy Association. This duality, a gifted entertainer celebrated for his contributions to comedy alongside the undeniable flaws in his personal life, shapes how we remember Jerry Lewis today. The meteoric rise of Martin and Lewis in the late 1940s and early 1950s created a golden era of comedy, blending Dean Martin's smooth crooner style with Jerry Lewis' wild, energetic improvisation. Their captivating performances across nightclubs, radio, television, and films made them the most profitable comedy duo in America. On stage, their chemistry was electric, drawing in audiences everywhere, but behind the scenes existed a more complex relationship. Lewis, known for his perfectionism, sought greater creative control within the partnership. He frequently revised sketches, directed scenes, and took charge of rehearsals, which began to create a rift between them. Martin, easygoing and instinctual, started to feel overlooked and unappreciated. As the public began to view Lewis as the leading creative force, the disparity in their earnings and recognition added more strain. Their differing work ethics, personal aspirations, and the exhausting pace of their success contributed to a growing tension. By 1956, this pressure became unsustainable, leading to their breakup, which became one of the most talked about splits in entertainment history. This separation not only ended a significant chapter in comedy, but also left emotional scars on both men. Lewis publicly mourned the loss, while Martin carried a quiet bitterness long after their final performance together. When Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis officially dissolved their partnership in July 1956, the announcement sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and left fans heartbroken. The duo had crafted an inseparable bond, a cultural phenomenon that redefined American comedy with their unique rapport. However, insiders had noticed the fissures long before the final curtain fell. Lewis's unyielding ambition to direct, write, and control their creative projects increasingly clashed with Martin's laid-back approach, and his desire to primarily focus on singing and acting. As their partnership progressed, tensions heightened. Martin began to feel like he was merely a straight man to Lewis's zany antics, causing resentment and frustration to boil beneath the surface. Friends and colleagues recalled a distinct change in dynamic, with cold silences backstage and fierce arguments that hinted at a growing emotional chasm. Following the breakup, Lewis found himself grappling with a profound depression, while Martin displayed a remarkable coolness as he rebuilt his career. The two men existed in estrangement for 2 decades, only crossing paths briefly in 1976 during a surprise reunion organized by Frank Sinatra at Lewis's telethon. Although they shared pleasantries and embraced for the cameras, the bond never fully healed. This public breakup serves as a poignant illustration of how creative brilliance can simultaneously foster and fracture under the weight of ego, fame, and lingering wounds. After the split from Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis faced a crucial moment in his career. Many wondered if he could succeed on his own without his famous partner. Lewis quickly proved them wrong. He launched a solo career that showcased his unique talents and creativity, establishing himself in the entertainment industry. His films like The Bellboy and The Nutty Professor highlighted his abilities to write, direct, produce, and star in his own projects, demonstrating that he was more than just a comic actor. He introduced innovative techniques, such as video assist, changing the landscape of filmmaking for future generations. However, his desire for complete control over productions led to challenges. This perfectionism often resulted in conflicts with studios and coworkers. Those who failed to meet his high standards faced harsh criticism or removed from projects entirely. As his headstrong nature alienated colleagues, Lewis found himself more isolated by the 1970s, a stark contrast to his earlier collaborative spirit. The irony of his situation was not lost on those who remembered that his earlier success was built on teamwork and partnership. One of the most unforgettable moments in Jerry Lewis's public life came live on television during the 1976 Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon, an annual fundraising event closely linked to Lewis' humanitarian work. Legendary crooner Frank Sinatra orchestrated a surprise reunion between Jerry and Dean Martin, marking a significant moment since it had been 20 years since the two had spoken. The atmosphere was electric as Martin walked on stage with a familiar smirk, catching Lewis off guard. Lewis, visibly stunned, embraced him to thunderous applause from the audience. For viewers at home, it felt surreal to see two icons, once estranged, come together for such a noble cause. However, beneath the surface, the old wounds had not healed. Their reunion was brief and polite, lacking any real emotional depth, with no heartfelt apologies exchanged. Those close to them later confirmed the deep resentment still lingered, especially from Martin's side. He remained distant, making no attempts to rebuild their friendship. Following Martin's passing in 1995, Lewis's absence from the funeral and memorial served as a sobering reminder that some broken bonds cannot simply be repaired with a public moment of affection. For Lewis, this reunion may have seemed like a mere performance, but the pain behind it told a much deeper story. Despite his public image as a zany, high-energy goofball, Jerry Lewis's behavior on film sets told a far more disturbing story. As his fame grew, so did his reputation for being a tyrant behind the scenes. Numerous actors, crew members, and collaborators described environments fraught with tension, fear, and emotional turmoil. Lewis demanded absolute control and was quick to lash out when things didn't meet his standards. He was known to berate camera operators, fire staff on a whim, and humiliate colleagues in front of others, often targeting those who were least able to fight back. Some reported that he micromanaged every detail, from lighting to wardrobe, while refusing to accept feedback or collaboration. This autocratic style not only stifled creativity, but fostered an atmosphere of anxiety and distrust. Particularly troubling were accounts from female co-stars and staffers who claimed that Lewis often directed his rage and scorn disproportionately toward women. His tantrums became legendary, and studios began to see him less as an asset and more as a liability. While his on-screen persona radiated joy and silliness, his on-set demeanor revealed a darker, more volatile personality, one that made working with him a psychologically exhausting experience. This dichotomy between his public charm and private cruelty only deepened the contradictions that define his legacy. In the wake of changing cultural attitudes, the stories about Jerry Lewis's treatment of women have gained significant attention. Actresses like Stella Stevens, who starred with him in The Nutty Professor, shared her experiences, revealing how emotionally damaging it was to work under his direction. Stevens recounted being demeaned and receiving cruel, misogynistic remarks that severely undermined her confidence. She was not the only one. More women spoke out, describing experiences of being talked down to, dismissed, or facing sexually inappropriate jokes and comments. On set, Lewis's need for control was overwhelming, often sidelining women's contributions and dictating their performances in ways that left them feeling powerless. This treatment reflected a troubling misogyny, often masked by the acceptance of the era's notion of eccentric genius. In interviews, Lewis made dismissive comments about female directors and women in comedy, claiming they didn't have the same talent as men. While such remarks were previously overlooked, they now highlight systemic sexism in Hollywood. Despite his notable impact on film, Lewis's legacy is irreversibly marred by his conduct towards the women in his life and career, intertwining his achievements with a troubling truth that cannot be ignored. Despite decades of innovation in film and comedy, Jerry Lewis held views about women in entertainment that were widely regarded as antiquated, offensive, and deeply rooted in sexism. During a 1998 interview at the Aspen Comedy Festival, Lewis declared that he didn't find female comedians funny. He claimed that he couldn't picture a woman performing slapstick or making a fool of herself like men could, because it diminished their femininity. He openly stated he admired women as baby-producing machines and preferred seeing them in supportive, decorative roles rather than as comedic leads. His remarks shocked many in the comedy world, especially as the 1990s ushered in a new era of female-led comedic talent, from Roseanne Barr to Ellen DeGeneres. The backlash was swift and vocal, with comedians and critics denouncing Lewis's comments as sexist and emblematic of a larger systemic issue in Hollywood that routinely denied women equal footing. What made his stance particularly galling was that it came not from a fringe figure, but from a man considered a legend. His remarks highlighted a cultural divide between his aging fanbase and a younger generation increasingly attuned to gender equality. Even decades after the golden age of his career, Lewis revealed a worldview frozen in time, clashing sharply with the progressive values of the era. Difficult behavior often shaped Jerry Lewis's personal relationships, particularly with the women closest to him. His first marriage to singer Patty Palmer lasted over 3 decades and produced 6 sons. Despite this long union, it was marked by significant power imbalances. Patty was much younger than Lewis, leading to dynamics where control and dominance prevailed. Their children observed this imbalance and later described their home life as one where Patty's voice was often silenced. Following years of emotional neglect and infidelity, Patty filed for divorce in 1980, seeking a way out of this tumultuous relationship. Shortly after, Lewis remarried Sandy Pitnick, a former Las Vegas dancer nearly 25 years his junior. Critics noted similar patterns of control in this second marriage, where an uneven power dynamic persisted. Family members revealed that Lewis regarded his wives almost as extensions of his own image, expecting support and presence at events while denying them equal say in significant matters. This mirrored the gender dynamics in his career, where women were seen primarily as supporters rather than leaders. Publicly, Lewis projected the image of a devoted husband and father, yet family stories suggested a man who prioritized emotional distance and demanded unwavering loyalty, often at the cost of genuine intimacy. Despite the public glow surrounding Jerry Lewis, a deep divide existed between the loving father he seemed to be and the reality described by his own children. His son Gary Lewis shed light on this discrepancy in his memoir, revealing a childhood marked by emotional distance rather than the warmth one would expect from a devoted parent. While Jerry built a reputation as a dedicated family man, Gary recalled a father who was more consumed by work and his lasting impact than by familial bonds. This relentless pursuit of success often sidelined genuine connections, leaving little room for affection or attention. Discipline was a priority in Jerry's eyes, with praise being a scarcity, creating an environment where his children felt they had to meet high standards without the support that usually comes from a nurturing relationship. Living in luxurious surroundings, they often felt like distant spectators, catching glimpses of their father on screens rather than experiencing his presence at home. Contrasting sharply with his private life, Jerry's public persona, especially at charity events like the Muscular Dystrophy Telethon, showcased a deep emotional connection with those he encountered, particularly children. He would frequently display vulnerability, urging others to show care and compassion. This public gentleness stood in stark opposition to the aloofness described by his sons, who portrayed a harsh reality of their father's emotional unavailability. This contradiction, the gap between Jerry's charismatic image and the emotional distance felt by his family, casts a long shadow over his legacy, suggesting that the persona he cultivated did not align with the reality experienced by his children. Perhaps the most painful aspect of Jerry Lewis's family life was the estrangement from some of his children, particularly his son Joseph. Joseph faced numerous struggles, including mental health and substance abuse issues, which contributed to significant tension between him and his father. Eventually, Joseph came out as gay, an act that he claimed led to a permanent rift with Jerry. He publicly accused his father of disowning him because of his sexuality, creating allegations that lingered over Jerry's reputation. For a man who had openly championed progressive causes and presented himself as an advocate for the vulnerable, this perceived rejection of his own son revealed a troubling contradiction in his character. Joseph spent much of his adult life distanced from the family, and sadly, he died by suicide in 2009 at the age of 45. Jerry made no public comment about his son's death, which underscored an image of emotional detachment during pivotal moments in his children's lives. In a further act of separation, Jerry chose to exclude all of his biological sons from his will, bequeathing his estate solely to his second wife and adopted daughter. This decision left many questioning how a man dedicated to fundraising for sick children could remain disconnected from his own flesh and blood. The narrative of Jerry Lewis and his family thus stands as one of the more heartbreaking elements of his complex legacy. As the years unfolded, the chaotic dynamics within the Lewis family revealed a troubling tale of emotional strife, fractured loyalties, and lingering resentment. Jerry Lewis, a comedy legend, fathered 6 sons with his first wife, Patty Palmer. However, numerous accounts from his sons, especially Gary, Christopher, and Anthony, depicted a childhood marred by favoritism and pain. The family home often reflected Jerry's fluctuating moods and towering ego, overshadowing any semblance of warmth or consistent support. His sons described an ongoing struggle for their father's affection, feeling inadequate in the face of his immense success. Furthermore, Jerry's second marriage to Sandy Pitnick and their adopted daughter Danielle introduced a contrasting family dynamic. Many insiders noted that Jerry displayed a more affectionate and involved approach to Danielle's upbringing, starkly contrasting with the distant and occasionally adversarial relationships he maintained with his biological sons. This perceived favoritism intensified feelings of betrayal among his first family. Ultimately, when Jerry decided to disinherit all 6 of his biological sons in his will, explicitly stating that they would receive nothing intentionally and with full knowledge, it left a lasting impact highlighted by familial alienation. The scars left by his choices extended beyond emotions into realms of legal and financial ramifications, creating a public image of a father who could enchant millions but faltered with those closest to him. Jerry Lewis's infamous perfectionism, so often cited as a driving force behind his artistic achievements, also proved to be a devastating obstacle in his personal life. According to his son Christopher, the same obsessive need for control that defined his work on film sets bled into their domestic life. Conversations felt more like commands than connections, and any attempt at emotional vulnerability was met with cold indifference or redirected into lectures about discipline, effort, or career. Lewis seemed incapable of turning off his director persona. Even at home, he was always performing, instructing, or correcting. Family meals, birthdays, and simple father-son interactions were either overshadowed by his mood swings or treated as opportunities to reinforce his authority. Christopher and his brothers described walking on eggshells, fearful of disappointing a man who often used silence or sarcasm as weapons. The emotional vacuum at home stood in sharp contrast to the public image Jerry maintained, that of a smiling, tireless advocate for sick children and struggling families. To his sons, this dissonance was not just confusing, it was painful. As adults, they struggled with mental health challenges, substance abuse, and fractured relationships of their own, often tracing the root of their turmoil back to the coldness of their upbringing. Lewis's inability, or unwillingness, to separate his professional identity from his role as a father remains one of the most tragic elements of his life story. For decades, Jerry Lewis stood as the face of the Muscular Dystrophy Association, captivating audiences worldwide. Through his annual Labor Day telethons, he raised over $2 billion that went toward research for neuromuscular diseases, transforming him into a beloved figure and a passionate advocate for children in need. His ability to connect emotionally with the public earned him acclaim, making him a respected name in charity work. However, this era met an unexpected and controversial end in 2011, when he was removed from his position as national chairman. This sudden change shocked Lewis, and many who had supported him throughout his career. The MDA offered vague reasons, referring to internal shifts, but reports indicated disagreements over the direction of the organization, branding issues, and struggles with the nature of modern charitable messaging. Once celebrated for his heartfelt appeals, Lewis became a contentious figure within the very organization he had helped to create. He eventually filed a lawsuit, claiming he was excluded from key decisions and denied recognition for decades of service. This rift cast a shadow on what was once considered his commendable contribution, leading critics to view it as indicative of a man struggling to relinquish control, even within a charitable context. The controversies surrounding his departure overshadowed the legacy he built, leaving behind a mixture of bitterness and unmet potential. In the latter stages of his life, Jerry Lewis faced significant financial and legal hurdles that diminished his once gleaming public image. Despite a successful career spanning decades, filled with hit films and lucrative deals, he became embroiled in numerous accusations of mismanaging his finances. Notably, Lewis had serious confrontations with the IRS, resulting in tax liens for unpaid debts that accumulated over several years. Reports from the early 1980s revealed that his financial obligations swelled into hundreds of thousands of dollars, a stark contrast to his earlier status as one of America's wealthiest entertainers. The legal battles extended further than tax issues, involving disputes with former collaborators, philanthropic organizations, and even strained relationships with his family regarding money and estate matters. One particularly troubling lawsuit claimed he had reneged on promised support to a former assistant. Additionally, his choice to cut ties with his biological children sparked intense speculation about his priorities concerning legacy and control. As a result, these financial and legal challenges did not merely attract attention, they contributed to an overarching dilemma. The contradiction of a man who garnered billions for muscular dystrophy while grappling with his own financial troubles raised questions. How was it possible for someone so charismatic on stage to become so embroiled in offstage chaos? For Jerry Lewis, his later years were marked by rather than celebration and fulfillment, a landscape rife with unresolved issues and public scrutiny, illustrating the intricate and often tragic nature of his existence. As the #MeToo movement spread in the late 2010s, it brought forward many voices that had long been silenced, exposing widespread abuse, harassment, and misogyny in the entertainment world. Jerry Lewis, a renowned figure in comedy and film, faced renewed scrutiny even after his passing shortly after this movement gained momentum. In 2018, several alarming allegations came to light, including claims from former child actor Sean Hayes and an anonymous woman. Hayes described uncomfortable experiences while working with Lewis, detailing inappropriate physical closeness and lewd remarks that made him feel unsafe. Meanwhile, the unnamed woman alleged that Lewis had made unwanted advances and exposed himself when she was just a teenager. Though these accusations did not lead to formal legal actions, they significantly impacted public perception. Questions arose about the extent to which Hollywood had overlooked abusive behavior for the sake of maintaining the facade of genius. Many began to wonder how many more voices had remained hushed, fearing reprisal. The resurgence of these allegations came at a time when society was ready to confront the fact that even the most cherished icons could engage in harmful actions. Even though Lewis was not available to respond to these claims, the pattern established by similar stories of abuse called for a reconsideration of how power dynamics operated in the entertainment industry, marking an important moment of accountability for someone who had once seemed invulnerable. Throughout and following the #MeToo movement, a series of claims emerged that painted a troubling picture of Jerry Lewis's conduct, which spanned decades and was much more than isolated incidents. The accusations spoke to a broader pattern of inappropriate behavior toward women and young actors. Multiple reports surfaced alleging that Lewis had made sexually inappropriate advances, particularly toward minors. These incidents ranged from exposing himself to making sexually charged remarks during film shoots or private encounters. One such account described how Lewis would use his fame and power to manipulate those around him, creating an environment of fear and silence. Victims often felt intimidated, and many, unable to escape his influence, were silenced either directly or through the unspoken threats of professional repercussions. In an era when such behavior was too frequently dismissed as eccentric or accepted due to the myth of the torture genius, many victims had no safe space to speak out. Those who witnessed his actions often remained quiet, gripped by the fear of being disbelieved, blacklisted, or ostracized. Critics argue that, while Lewis was never officially charged, the lack of legal action reflects Hollywood's long-standing failure to confront abuse within its ranks, rather than an indication of innocence. The entertainment industry, particularly at the peak of Lewis's career, was a closed system where misconduct was often ignored or actively covered up. In this context, the allegations against Lewis seem less like aberrations and more like the predictable outcomes of a culture of unchecked entitlement, a culture Lewis, knowingly or not, took full advantage of. In the wake of these revelations, a stark divide emerged between those who continued to venerate Jerry Lewis and those who felt betrayed by the truth behind the mask. His defenders cited his decades-long marriage to Sandy Pitnick, his tireless charity work, and his irreplaceable contributions to comedy and cinema. They described him as a flawed, but fundamentally decent man, burdened by fame and misunderstood by modern standards. However, for many others, particularly those in the emerging generation of entertainers and critics, these justifications rang hollow. History has shown that a respectable public image, even one built on family values and good deeds, does not guarantee moral integrity. Time and again, figures once idolized have been revealed to harbor darker tendencies, and Lewis was no exception. The duality of his persona, a goofy, childlike performer who elicited laughter and joy, versus a demanding, domineering man accused of deeply inappropriate behavior, forced the public to confront a harsh reality. For every reel of laughter, there was a reel of pain behind the scenes. The question was no longer whether Jerry Lewis had changed comedy, but whether the cost of that brilliance had been borne by those who were silenced, dismissed, or hurt along the way. Jerry Lewis passed away on August 20, 2017, at the age of 91. His death brought a wave of tributes from fans, entertainers, and news outlets across the globe. Many remembered him as a pioneer who changed slapstick into meaningful storytelling and pushed the boundaries of film direction. He also played a significant role in charity, raising billions for children in need through various campaigns. While these achievements were celebrated, they did not overshadow the more troubling aspects of his legacy. Critics and former collaborators began to speak candidly about their experiences with him, shedding light on the mistreatment, cruelty, and contradictions that marked his life. This sparked a broader cultural conversation around the question of whether we can separate the art from the artist. Should outstanding creative talent excuse personal failings? As discussions unfolded, they revealed the complexity of public figures whose influence spans generations. For many, Lewis stands as a comedic icon, his films bringing laughter even today. However, for others, he represents pain and the consequences of unchecked power. In death, as in life, Jerry Lewis remained a figure whose legacy defies easy categorization, continually stirring debate about how we remember those who have shaped our culture. Jerry Lewis stands as a towering figure in the world of entertainment, truly embodying the term comedian monster. His legacy blends genius with turmoil, laughter with conflict. The persona he created on screen, with its slapstick charm, quickly masked deeper emotional struggles rooted in his early life. His iconic partnership with Dean Martin, initially a joyous celebration of comedic talent, was peppered with complex tensions. As audiences cheered for his outrageous antics, critics often questioned his methods, sparking debates about artistic integrity and the nature of humor. The controversy surrounding his methods and the public's mixed reactions painted him as both a beloved figure and a contentious presence in Hollywood. Moreover, his extensive philanthropic work, particularly his commitment to muscular dystrophy research, added layers to his character, showcasing a man who cared deeply while simultaneously pushing boundaries. Through the various facets of his life, Jerry Lewis has continued to provoke thought and conversation about what it means to be an entertainer. This intricate tapestry of achievements, struggles, and contradictions invites audiences to view him through a lens that challenges simple classification, suggesting that the essence of a true artist may lie in their complexity.